you get them. So, all right. So we're going to get started today. For those of you that maybe are newer to the different forums where this was posted, or you found us on the different social media sites, my name is Nate Plummer. I call myself an actor's coach, which basically means I'm a voice teacher, acting teacher, audition coach. I also do a lot of life and business coaching for actors. I am the artistic director and founder of Stage Door Unlocked, which is an online coaching and resource service for actors and teachers and coaches just like all of you. We do offer coaching services for teachers and coaches. So if you are ever stuck on a topic, or maybe you want to know a little bit more about what we're talking about today, you can schedule a chat with me. We can chat over coffee. That's one of my favorite things to do, is just chat with other teachers and coaches over coffee. We also have our courses and ebooks, which I'll talk about at the end. I don't want this to be, shameless promotion. I do really want it to be all the right information for you guys, but, have to justify the time and all of that, as I'm sure you all can understand. So I'll do a tiny little shameless plug at the end. Yes, Patty was asking, is everybody muted? Yes, you are. I should be the only person that you guys can hear talking. So, all right. So I want to start today by talking about the definition of good technique here in musical theater. So good technique is different than what we might refer to as good technique in the more classical singing styles. Good technique is a label that I don't like to use in musical theater at all, personally. I think it's more, is it effective? Because musical theater is about creating sounds, not creating good technique. We use our voices to create the sounds to tell the story. So sometimes the sounds aren't going to fall into that umbrella of good technique that we might hear in classical singing. So the question just is, are we creating healthy sounds? And I'm going to define healthy sounds as sustainable and repeatable. So it might not be exactly the sound that we think of as great singing, but is it something that the actor or the performer can repeat and do consistently 8 shows a week or through a 40, 50 performance run? Then it's healthy sounds, healthy singing for musical theater. One of the things that I think is really important, and a question that I get asked a lot, is how do we learn what makes good singing technique in musical theater? And to me, it's about understanding the ingredients, understanding how all of the pieces come together. And so a lot of people recommend for technique training for teachers that want to explore musical theater, especially if you are a little more in the classical bel canto style in your training. I would look at Estel and functional singing training. If you'd like more information about those types of trainings, obviously we talk about them quite a bit in Voice Teachers for Young Singers and in PBT. But if you have questions about where to find training resources, feel free to reach out and let me know. Musical theater technique comes from pop music. So there is a saying among musical theater voice teachers and coaches, as does pop music, as does musical theater. And it is because musical theater is truly an American art form. So because we're more focused on telling the stories and connecting with an audience rather than showing great technique, we see the evolution of the sounds in musical theater change. And it is because of that the techniques change. And that's how we're able to apply so many of these specific styles to training individual techniques. Musical theater is all about the story, so it's not about the technique. That's one of the differences in opera. Musical theater comes out of the days of vaudeville and was started by the lower class immigrants in the US. So as part of that, they couldn't afford to go to the opera. So musical theater kind of became poor man's opera. And so a lot of times in musical theater traditions, you see us kind of thumbing our nose at opera a little bit. So the classical training is not going to be the be-all, end-all as far as our goals in musical theater. We are much more interested in creating sounds that help us tell the story. Acting with the voice does not always equal singing. So are we creating sounds that are healthy, that aren't going to cause vocal damage? This is a really important thing because a lot of times the sounds that our musical theater performers are going to make might, in a more classical sense, seem like not the greatest or not the healthiest technique. So the question is, if they have to make the sound, how do we help them make that sound in a healthy way rather than saying that sound isn't good? We don't always have that luxury when we're coaching musical theater, especially if we're working with professional performers. Sometimes the sound is the expectation, and we have to say, how do I help you create that sound in a healthy, sustainable, and repeatable way? Because of that, musical theater gets to explore all kinds of crazy sounds that we can use in the voice studio to help our clients figure out how to make these sounds. And that's where we're really focusing on today. So the first thing that I like to tell a lot of voice teachers when they're really diving into using musical theater is encourage listening in your studios, maybe even making it part of your process when you're helping a student learn a new song. I like to think of musical theater as learning a foreign language. We can't just create these sounds if we've never heard them before, because the sound options in musical theater, or the sound options really in singing in general, but specifically in musical theater, are so vast. They aren't always sounds that we're used to hearing. So one of the ways that we have to do that is by listening. And I strongly encourage teachers to provide recordings for your clients. Providing recordings that you trust of performers that you think do a really good job demonstrating a particular skill. Doesn't mean that they do everything in the piece perfectly, but if they really demonstrate the mixed voice really well, giving them a specific reference of this is really good sound in the performance of this song, then you're giving them kind of the vocabulary to copy from. If we think back to how babies learn to talk, they learn by imitating. This is different than copying. Copying is trying to be exactly the same. Imitating often involves some form of exaggeration. When we imitate someone, we do an impression of someone, we exaggerate something about their sound. So we can imitate these musical theater performers with our clients and help them figure out how that sound is created, and then we can always back away from it a little bit. I like to use the number system. If somebody takes something to an extreme, let's say forward resonance, the really bright, twangy sound, they take that to an extreme as part of the exploration, the imitation process, then saying, okay, let's back off a little bit. Let's say that was a 10, what would it be at a 7? Going and teaching them the extremes of these sounds and then backing away is really, really helpful. And especially if we can find singers that do the things at the extremes. So I'm going to kind of use some of them as references as we're going through things today. I like the idea of active listening in our studio. So active listening with the intent of hearing and seeing specific things. So here is a little picture of what active listening is for a lot of coaching and teaching methodologies. Being attentive, asking open-ended questions, asking probing questions, requesting clarifications, paraphrasing, be attuned to and reflecting feelings, and then summarizing. All things that we can do while listening to a recording. This is a great thing to do in your studio. It's another great option, especially if someone's feeling a little under the weather, or maybe they don't have a ton of energy and you still want to work on the song. Finding someone that they can listen to, and then you as a team can break it down and pick apart, you know, I really love when they do this vowel shape, or when they do this breath phrasing here, or things like that. Giving them those little things to pick apart. Helping them learn that process so they can start doing what we do all day long, listening to singers and analyzing what they do, what techniques are effective and what aren't. Obviously, different things that we can analyze: their vowels, their diction, breath, phrasing, placement, and accents, and then their acting choices. And again, going back to exploring imitations and extremes with them. So let's say they're doing On My Own and they're really wanting to work that really bright, pingy sound that Lea Salonga has, going through and having them take her sound to an extreme and then saying, great, what did that feel like? What did you notice? What did you observe? And then getting them to create their own vocabulary for the sounds rather than us telling them, this is how you make the sound, and then they have to piece it together. Reverse the process, make the sound, and then put the labels to it. We do that when we're learning to talk. We do that when we're learning foreign languages. Might as well apply it in our singing. So getting into specific musical theater techniques is what we're going to do next. But I do want to say we have the Q&A thing here in the webinar. So if you have questions as I'm going through, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. If you have any questions about a particular thing, I have the Q&A on my screen, so I'll try to answer as we go. But we will have a whole Q&A section, hopefully for the last few minutes of the webinar. So we'll get started with belting. Belting is a very, very common musical theater sound. It's something that a lot of teachers have various opinions on. So for the sake of this webinar, I want to clarify the terms that we're going to use in defining belting in musical theater. And these are more industry-based terms than more teacher-based terms. So for the sake of this webinar, I'm going to use what I'm going to call colloquial terms, the terms that I think everyone across the board will understand. There are tons of names for these different things, and everyone has their own opinions of which label is the best depending on your particular methodology of teaching. But just so that everyone knows kind of what I'm saying today, I'm going to refer to things as head voice, chest voice, belting, and then mixed voice. So belting, for our purposes, is going to refer to mixed voice. How we use mixed voice in musical theater is really important. More often than not, we're going to be mixing some form of sound in musical theater rather than being solely in chest voice or solely in head voice. And belting, as we refer to it in musical theater in the industry, is an effective use of resonance while in the mix. So that's a big, broad umbrella because there's lots of sounds of belting that we have in musical theater. So the songs that we're going to use are going to be kind of dependent on what sound that we want in belting. So this right here is the visual spectrum that I like to use in the studio. I like to refer to chest voice as red voice, head voice as blue voice, and then asking clients, what shade of purple do you think we're in as far as the mix? Is it a really reddish purple? Is it a really bluish purple? Especially when we're getting into belting. And we'll talk about the different kinds of belting in just a little bit. But the kind of main idea of belting, the big belting, goes back, of course, to Ethel Merman, everybody's favorite beltress. Maybe not the greatest belter in the history of musical theater, but definitely one of the most iconic. So as we're going through looking at rep, we're not going to see belting appearing in pieces before the 1920s, and even then, it's really rare. Belting doesn't truly become part of the musical theater vocabulary until we start getting into the Rodgers and Hammerstein era of like Oklahoma. We do see it before that, but it's really limited to a very select group of performers, Ethel Merman being one of them. Because we didn't have microphones yet, it's the big, bright, brassy belt. The human trumpet was a name that was used for Ethel Merman. And so this is going to be teaching an extreme. So if you're really wanting to introduce belting to young ladies, helping them create these sounds, the Ethel Merman era, the 1920s to the 1940s, her style of songs, going to be really great for that. Definitely going to be wanting to stick in the more mezzo songs. Mezzos are belters in this era, sopranos are not. Belting doesn't really move above a D in this early era of musical theater. That we do hear it a little bit in like Blow Gabriel Blow from Anything Goes, but for the most part, it's rare. So if you have a singer that has a really limited belting range, most of these songs are going to cap out around a C sharp. So like the song Shy from Once Upon a Mattress, we don't go much farther than that C sharp. And even that C sharp is only there for an eighth note. Most of the time we're living right around a B flat. One of the great things about this era is, and one of the things that's great about the era that also facilitated belting working really well for these early musicals, is that in the 1920s we had what was referred to as a New England modified accent. So that's that very high society, bright forward placement song or sound that we have in songs from like Anything Goes or On the Town. Early shows like that are going to have that really bright forward sound and bright forward over exaggerated vowels, which we all know work really well for belting anyway. So embracing that New England accent in those songs can be really helpful for our younger singers, especially when we're trying to help them find the sound first rather than creating the sound. So if we get them to copy this sound from the recordings, then we can explain, okay, you've got tons of space in the back, you've got really bright forward placement, etc., telling them what they're already doing and putting labels to it afterwards. The 1940s through the 1950s, we start seeing a lot of Southern accents appearing in shows, thinking like Ado Annie from Oklahoma or Annie Oakley from Annie Get Your Gun. And that accent, same thing. Big vowels, bright forward placement really works well for helping our young singers find those shapes because it's an exaggeration again. So again, when we're working with our younger ladies, we're going to be looking for songs that are written for young mezzos and character roles. We aren't going to see the ingenues belting really until we get into the contemporary musical theater of like the late 80s to now. We want songs with bright, over-exaggerated accents because those exaggerations really are going to help bring the sound really forward. Another era or style of musical that uses a lot of belting, and we see it a lot, are patter songs. So patter songs are very text-driven, which is great. We get lots of consonants, which equals a lot of compression, which is going to really help us keep that more chest voice sound as we're going higher. So patter songs, especially from the 1920s into the 1960s, work great for teaching belting. Specific places to look would be jazz age pieces by Cole Porter, Leonard Bernstein, Irving Berlin. Some examples of that would be I Got Sun in the Morning from Annie Get Your Gun and I Can Cook Too from On the Town. Really great examples of that kind of calling sound belt. When you're working this belt, this is a great example of the sound created by the Hey Taxi exercise, calling across the room. That sound, the calling voice belt, is this era. Belting starts to shift once we get microphones in the late 1960s, early 70s, but when we're working that style belt, where it's a much more chest voice belt, these types of pieces, early musical theater is where you want to look, again, looking for mezzo roles. Even if a singer isn't a mezzo, you can still use the songs from the Singers Music Theater anthologies to help them find these sounds, because a lot of the early belt ranges were very limited. So you're not going to see going down into the basement. The issue will be more, are you going to get into tons of ledger lines that your young sopranos aren't going to be able to hit? So you're going to have to be a little selective in your rep, but most of the kind of belter pieces stay in a much more limited range in the early musical theater because they had to carry across an orchestra without microphones. So great places to look in the golden age would be, again, the mezzo characters in Rodgers and Hammerstein, Jules Stein, Frank Lauser, I Can't Say No from Oklahoma, Shy from Once Upon a Mattress, I Got a Crow from Peter Pan, and Anything Adelaide from Guys and Dolls. Because she's got that bright, really bright character voice. She's also got the New York accent, which is going to really spread because she's got that Brooklyn accent. It's going to spread, so we're going to get what I call clown lips. If you think of putting, the bright red lips on a clown and how exaggerated that is, that's really this style of belt. You're going to get kind of much more lateral than vertical spread, which is important. We still want the vertical spread, but we also want it to go side to side, so we get that extra stretch in the back of the soft palate. When we have guys, we don't really see belting for guys as we know it in this sound until the 1980s. So if a guy character seems like they're belting and it's pre-1980, probably not, because we don't see we see a lot more of the mix into the more classical training sound pre-microphones. We hear the bright, nerdy belt once microphones first start to show up in the late 1960s to the 1980s. So this would be songs like Try Me from She Loves Me, or even, depending on how it's performed, the actual song She Loves Me from She Loves Me. It's the kind of nerd voice sound, really bright, really forward. We hear belting in character roles, not in leading men, until we get into the 1980s. We start hearing the more chest voice. I like to refer to it as the Les Mis belting. We start hearing that more in the 1980s. Again, once microphones start to come in, that isn't something that we hear before that. So err on the side of classical training pre-1980s. If you're really looking for helping a young guy get into belting, you're going to want to look kind of in that pop rock musical era of the 1980s. So Andrew Lloyd Webber, Stephen Schwartz, Stephen Sondheim, Bubel and Schomburg, et cetera, et cetera. One common misconception is that the song Maria from West Side Story is belted. It's not. This is still considered a mix. That B flat is a mix. It airs more on the classical training. We do hear that sound shift in the later revivals, but it's a different kind of belting than this kind of intro belting where everything is just big shapes. So Maria is a good example of that shift. On the Street Where You Live, Gigi, that sound, that lighter mix sound, is a different kind of belting that we don't actually start hearing guys from a technique standpoint do until early 2000s. That's where Jeremy Jordan comes in. He's a really good example of someone who can mix belt that sound, oftentimes referred to as puppy whimpering belting. But for the purposes of this, songs that are written in that style are going to be much more traditional classical training, because that's what they were written for. If a microphone didn't exist, it's probably not belted for guys. So our line for that is Hello Dolly, 1964. So anything pre-1964, probably not really belted in the way that we think of belting today, especially for guys. Belting is for tenors early on. We don't hear baritones belting until the 1980s. So if you're looking for a belt piece for a young baritone, you're going to want to, again, look in the pop rock musicals such as Les Mis. Javert is a really good example of that. Even Phantom from Phantom of the Opera is, depending on which version you're watching. If you're watching him from the UK, he's always a baritone. If you're watching him in the US, sometimes he switches back and forth. Patty would like to know a little bit more about puppy belting. I'll talk about it when I get into the real mix voice belting, because Jeremy Jordan does that brilliantly. That's where there's the weird little puppy whimper at the beginning of all of his onsets to things. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Again, like I said, we don't have belting until we get into the era of microphones or the Beatles make their invasion. So we start to hear the lighter decompressed sounding guys, less weight, less vibrato once the Beatles appear on Ed Sullivan. So again, if you're trying to place where these songs that you should be looking for are coming from, pre-Beatles will not have any belting. After that, great. You can hear a lot of the belting technique showing up in how the Beatles start to sing. And we really, because it is pop influenced in musical theater, once the Beatles come in, musical theater changes forever. Belting doesn't start for guys in this style until an E. So again, if you're looking at the range, that's a good place to look. Belting is used to show emotional vulnerability because of the risk of cracking in guys. So unlike in ladies where it's used to show strength and power, guys, it's used to show that they're taking an emotional risk. So if you're looking for songs that are going to help your singers work that, the high stakes emotional songs, really great for working with young singers in introducing them to belting. Again, like I said, emotionally driven songs. So great places to look for these would be the pop rock musicals of the 1980s to now, Anthem from Chess, Close Every Door to Me from Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, Empty Chairs from Les Mis are all great places, are great songs for our young teens to look at, or if you're just trying to introduce someone to belting. The classical musicals, we have the late 70s to the mid 80s. In these, so She Loves Me from She Loves Me, It's Not Where You Start from Sideshow. This sound of the belt is a little closer to the Ethel Merman style belting. It's much more like Called Across the Room, whereas the pop rock musicals get a little more depth, a little darker sound, a little more presence to them. So it depends on what you're trying to work. If you're trying to work with a guy that carries tons of weight, you're going to want to work classic musicals because they're going to be brighter, they're going to be nerdier sounding, for lack of a better word. If you're trying to get someone to get that depth presence and carry that chest voice sound up, you're going to want to look at the pop rock musicals. Again, depending on which style of belting or which component to the belting, you're wanting to look at. Character roles, again, this is where we're going to see belting in the early musicals. So just like with the ladies, we're not going to see it in our leads. We're going to see it in the character roles, the supporting roles. So Giants in the Sky from Into the Woods, again, Try Me from She Loves Me, and Miracle of Miracles from Fiddler on the Roof, all really great examples of the character style belting. And that's a tradition that continues even into today. We see the character roles belting in the brighter style and the more calling voice style. A great example of this would be Ogie's song from Waitress. We also have how Bach sings in Wicked is another great example of this style of belting. Disney's Young Men fall into this, but they are a little more mixed. So these are songs that we like to give our young guys, but this is still mixing. This is, again, into the lighter style of belting. Go the Distance from Hercules and Proud of Your Boy from Aladdin, really playing into the emotional vulnerability because that mixing can cause us to flip and crack really, really quick. So that's what we're looking for, especially the young men going on a journey are going to have the lighter belt. So knowing kind of where you're looking for in your young singer or just even in adult singers, knowing what sound you're trying to get them to make, the rep will cause that rather than the technique causing the sound. Library belting, quiet mix belting, this is where the puppy whimper comes in. This is belting without volume. And this is really where we're seeing belting going now. So kind of after Rent, we got tired of people screaming in our faces when we were in the audition room all the time. So we wanted to hear that people could control their sound relying on their microphones. This is one of the reasons why, personally, I love teaching online because I hear everybody through a microphone. If I hear that they're starting to distort in the microphone, means that the sound people in their booth aren't going to be able to do anything to control their belt. So getting them to back off, really important. Musical theater relies on microphones, so it's really important to teach your singers how to sing where they're not going to be blowing out a sound system all the time. Belting is not about volume, it's about resonance. If you'd like to know more about belting, specific belting techniques, I'd love to do like a chat with you or something, and we can go through some specific techniques of how belting works in musical theater. Belting in this style is going to appear in the contemporary shows. It's a head voice dominant mix to our belt. So still forward resonance, but everything's kind of coming top down. We're hearing a lighter sound being blended in with the bright forward vowels. It's belting but it's not really the belting sound of Ethel Merman that we were hearing. So again, if you're wanting to work that big, bright, brassy belt, everything pre-1990 is going to be that style. For the most part, library belting kicks in right around the time of Rent, because they know there were so many people that got tired of hearing "Let's Go Out Tonight" in the room where people were just screaming it all the time. So belting, but the true vulnerability of the belt. So this really comes in for ladies. We had vulnerability for the guys earlier on, but now we're starting to hear belting related to vulnerability for ladies. So there's less focus on being big and loud and more about staying small, kind of whispering in the room. That's why it's called belting or library belting. Focus on less breath and lots of decompression, but still taking the chest voice register up. So it's a very much a coordination shift rather than just be big. It's how do you mix all of that? Patty said, what genre is this most present? The contemporary, yes. So library belting should apply across the board now. If you're sending somebody into the audition room, they should be able to sing their song quietly, where they're not screaming at us. That's a big thing in the audition scene right now, but you're going to find the techniques, the songs are going to lend themselves to it more in the contemporary musicals. They're going to be harder because they're higher, but the way that they're traditionally sung and the way that the singers on the recordings are going to sing them are going to be more in the contemporary musicals. I like to say post-Rent, which was, late 90s, but really 2000s, you're going to hear it. Even listening to how Idina mixes her way through the end of Defying Gravity in Wicked can technically be considered library belting. And you can hear that because the shapes aren't so big. We hear it mixed really loud in the cast recording, because we all love to live in that big, huge wall of sound. But remember that those musicals had the sound equipment to amplify the sound. So the singers aren't relying on acoustical resonance. They're relying on amplified resonance, which is why their sounds can be smaller, brighter. We can hear more decompression. We can hear more mixing, more flipping, all of that kind of stuff because we're not worried about projection anymore. So this is where belting relies less on projection across to the back of the theater. And now we just want that vulnerability of, are we going to crack? Are we feeling that emotional risk tension? That's where belting really comes in now, as far as why we use it in musical theater. It's a great question. Song examples that work really, really well for library belting or quiet mixing would be any song that is sung quietly. I love asking my singers to whisper, giving them a reason to sing their song quietly. If we are singing a song and they're belting their face off, that's cool, and it's cool that they can do that, but they're not going to be able to do that 8 shows a week. So giving them an acting choice that says, okay, what if there were people in the other room hearing you have these big emotional thoughts? Do you want them to hear all of that? That doesn't always work. We don't always want them to hear, in the other room, all of our big, crazy emotional thoughts. A great example of that is The Wizard and I. She's standing out there in the middle of the school's, lawn, singing this song at the top of her lungs, and people are going to walk by and look at her and go, what is wrong with you? Why are you screaming? So rather than having the song sound like it's shouted and sound like it's screaming, have it be emotionally motivated, letting the sound be more out of the excitement and the energy rather than I have to sing this loud. Belting doesn't have to be big. Belting is just taking one register into the other. So it can be head voice coming down or chest voice coming up. I know that is kind of a gray area in vocal techniques, but for musical theater, that's what we refer to it as. In the industry, among casting directors, music directors, audition coaches, it's just dragging one register into the other. So you can belt from the top down or you can belt from the bottom up. either way, it's still belting in our eyes. Coffee shop songs, obviously, for those of you that know Stage Door Unlocked and know me, obviously, I want to stay on brand and have the coffee, but a song that would be as part of a conversation among two friends in a coffee shop. So Taylor the Latte Boy is a really great example of this, because you're telling a story to a friend and it's not going to be big, but the emotional stakes are big. So it doesn't need to be loud. You just have to have the emotional motivation. Emotionally painful songs. This is a really big one for guys. We're going to hear guys going high, but we want that danger of the crack. So Mama Look Sharp from 1776. It's a little early stylistically for this, because that's a late 70s musical, but it does work really well. It wasn't originally performed in this style, but the tradition has shifted to that it's performed in this style now. Tell My Father from Civil War, parallel song to Mama Look Sharp. They both have the same sound, almost the same story, just different parent. And Mama Who Bore Me from Spring Awakening, another great example of a song that is not intended to be screamed in our face. It's supposed to be emotionally vulnerable, high risk, but small, quiet. Contemporary musical theater does this. We do hear a lot more amplification the later we get into the 2000s and into the 2010s. Journey to the Past from Anastasia, a really good example of someone who mastered this style really early on in her career, is Christy Altmore. She does this really, really well. You can hear her belt is much more head voice focused, head voice dominant, compared to, say, Sutton Foster, who takes a lot more chest voice into her sound. And then again, Taylor the Latte Boy. Kristen Chenoweth is not the greatest library belter, but she uses the skills of library belting really well in the song Taylor the Latte Boy. So hearing how she navigates her way through that would be a really great listening opportunity for a singer that you're wanting to work on belting quiet. I love using Taylor the Latte Boy because you can tell them to focus on the acting, and most of the time you get the sound you want, rather than saying, okay, we're going to work this technique all the time, because then they're thinking technique rather than focusing on how do I sing this song. Your technique in musical theater, I like to say, is like your underwear. We want to know you have it, but we don't want to see it. So if you're spending all your time focusing on your technique, we're going to lose the song. We're going to lose the story that you're telling. So oftentimes I will just say, we're going to work mixing this song, and I'd like you to come in, sing it, just copying Chenoweth, and then we'll work out exactly what you're doing that works and explain what you're doing that works so that you can associate those tools and those skills with mixed voice or whatever it is that we're working. By doing it that way, they're creating the sound the way that they just would. They're just copying, they're creating the sound. But then the story can kind of take over a little bit more. They're going to act more. So if they're sitting in the coffee shop, they're not going to be screaming because everyone's going to be looking at them going, what's wrong with you? So if they're in the coffee shop or they're in their bedroom, they don't want people to hear, they're going to be a little quieter. By default, they're going to be whispering, which is going to give us more decompression, a little more head voice dominant mix. It's going to be a little quieter. So it's more, how are you shaping your approach to the technique? But a lot of times the songs, if you give them the song, give them the story, it will solve the technique, and then you can tell them what they're doing later. Head voice for ladies. This is one of those fun areas where we have the girls that come in that are amazing belters, and then we have the girls that come in and are amazing at head voice. And usually if we try to teach them the opposite technique, they hate their sound. And that's really common. I for a long time thought it was just me, and then I was talking with a bunch of colleagues, and we all realized it's kind of consistent that way. And it's because the way that sound feels is very different. It's new, it's unique. So by giving them a frame of reference to listen to copy, they're hearing this language. I like to think that for when we have someone that's really good at belting, we're trying to teach them head voice, it is totally like learning a foreign language. And to just hand them a sheet music and go, or do exercises with them is almost like handing them a book on how to speak Japanese without giving them any way of hearing the sound. We have to give them the experience of playing and creating the sound. So we want songs that are going to instantly take them there, that when they hear the sound and they copy it, it will instantly take them there. And then we can go through and say, what are you noticing with your breath? What are you noticing with your placement? What are you noticing with the tension that you're feeling, or your larynx position, or however you want to explore that with your students? So the songs that are going to default into head voice for ladies will be Golden Age, 1940s to 1950s. The songs with the true melodic lines. We're not going to hear this in patter songs at all. Unlike opera, where we'll have, very, the crazy runs of eighth notes where we're bouncing up and down, for example, the Queen of the Night aria, that doesn't happen in musical theater. When we have this true head voice, it's going to be much more connected, much more through lines in melodic structures. It's always a soprano sound. Mezzos are never going to be in their head voice because they're the bright, brassy character roles. We're not going to hear them use head voice at all. They might later on to flip in to show emotional vulnerability. We'll talk about that when we get into the guys, especially do that. We hear head voice to show vulnerability, but with ladies, it's all to be pretty princesses and ingenues and all of that. So that's where you really want to look for them. The head voice sound, as we know it in musical theater, really drops off once we have microphones. So the true traditional classical training head voice, we don't hear once we have microphones. I don't know why that happened. It does appear very, very rarely, but even then it's a much more supported sound, much more connected mix post-1970. So if you're really looking for a true head voice technique, resonance, placement, all that stuff to send to the back of the theater with the glorious ringing and ping and all of that stuff, looking pre-1970s, typically characters who are princesses or ingenues. For the purposes of musical theater, an ingenue is anyone under the age of 20 that is a soprano. Again, the supported connected head voice appears in 1980s. So there is a definite sound difference between, say, Lori from Oklahoma singing Many a New Day to Cosette in Les Mis singing In My Life. The sounds are very different. So if you're really wanting to work true head voice techniques where it's the lighter, floatier, breathier, decompressed sound, pre-1970s with the mics, or without, songs that were done without mics. Another great place to look would be operettas. So the Gilbert and Sullivan always have the nice ingenue characters. The Golden Age with Roger Hammerstein, Lerner and Loewe, Frank Lauser, Leonard Bernstein, they're all going to have a soprano. There was a tradition where you had the four main characters. You had a soprano, who was usually your female ingenue lead. You had your mezzo-soprano, who was her quirky sidekick. You had the tenor, who was usually some kind of goofball character. And then you had the baritone, who was the true leading man. So again, if you're looking for the types, those would be the places to look. That tradition falls off once we get into the 1970s, because then we kind of stop caring about the true opera traditions and having to send the sound to the back of the theater and all of that, because now we can sing whatever we want and just let the characters create sounds. It's going to be really rare to see a soprano character that does the true legit head voice that is older than her 20s. So looking at young female characters, teens, late 20s. I'm saying the character, not the performer. A lot of the performers were older, but the character themselves almost always going to be younger. Great place to look for these would be love songs. The melodic lines of the love songs, such as like My White Knight or Before I Gaze at You Again from Camelot, all of those love songs from the 1940s, 1950s, great for female head voice. We have songs with big, long legato phrases. If it's choppy, if it's, like I said, an up-tempo, probably not intended to be a true head voice piece. Head voice for guys, again, because it didn't carry to the back of the theater, we don't really see it until we get post microphones. There's a strong voice on the mix into the head voice because that comes out of the Beatles and the pop music influence. We also have the 1970s with all the folk music. Think John Denver really starts to become one of the first times when we start to hear the light, breathy head voice in guys. Typically, they're very young characters in very vulnerable moments. Again, we like to hear guys running that risk of cracking, and hearing a guy flip into their head voice is really powerful. So, for example, Toby, here we got Neil Patrick Harris singing to the great belter Patti LuPone, but he's a really great example of a young character singing a very vulnerable song that flips into head voice. This would be Not While I'm Around from Sweeney Todd. A great example of the use of head voice in here. The light, breathy, head voicey sound is 1970s to 1980s, because that's the more folk era influence. We get the reinforced sound once we start getting into the pop rock music. Yes, tenor belt, Jesus Christ Superstar. Yes, that would be the pop rock sound. And actually, I was just getting there. So the reinforced pop rock sound of the high head voice thing does show up as a result of rock music. So again, another great example of how pop music is influencing things. So Jesus Christ Superstar has, I Only Want to Say, Gethsemane, big, high, reinforced falsetto, very different sound than the light, breathy head voice falsetto of, say, Les Mis, where we have Jean Valjean singing Bring Him Home. So I like to break them up as the head voice is like Jean Valjean's Bring Him Home, Not While I'm Around, those kind of sounds, whereas falsetto, even though they are technically the same thing, but I like to train guys that they are separate because we do expect different sounds. So falsetto, or what I call reinforced falsetto, would be that rock edge sound of like Freddie Mercury or Jesus Christ Superstar or Frankie Valli. That sound we really start to hear in the 80s, but especially now, we're hearing that sound a lot in musical theater because we have microphones. It wasn't something that we were going to be able to do pre-microphones. If you're really wanting to work the light head voice sound, looking at folk-based shows, so Jesus Christ Superstar, Andrew Lloyd Webber, Schwartz has Godspell and Pippin, great places for the lighter head voice. Andrew Lloyd Webber has Joseph. He also has a couple songs in Jesus Christ Superstar that work really well for that. Some of his early stuff, very early Andrew Lloyd Webber, will have that lighter sound because he's really a pop-influenced composer. The pop rock operas, Stephen Sondheim, Bubel and Schomburg, Frank Wildhorn, they're going to have more head voice, again, appearing in the vulnerable moments. Contemporary musical theater uses head voice all the time. Fierro flips up there in Wicked very, very frequently. I'm Alive from Next to Normal, Gabe's up there constantly. So if you're, again, depending on what kind of head voice you're wanting to work, if you're noticing that you just need to get them to flip into that gear, you're probably going to want to use one of the folk-based shows. Songs like Corner of the Sky work really well for introducing that concept. But if you're wanting to strengthen their head voice, you're going to probably want to do one that's going to have the reinforced falsetto. So we're going to hear that kind of rock sound in the later shows. And a great way of strengthening that gear is to work those kinds of songs because they're really emotional. And that emotion, it's almost like that reinforced falsetto is like belting in your head voice. So it gives them that strength and that compression because of the emotions rather than saying, I just need you to be stronger. So the contemporary shows, pop rock operas work really well for strengthening your head voice. Because of the styles of the various artists used in them, there's a lot of this sound appearing in the jukebox musicals. So Jersey Boys, Ain't Too Proud, which is coming very, very soon, going to have lots of head voice stuff. We also hear a lot of head voice in the tenors in Mamma Mia because that was part of ABBA's sound. Very emotional songs, vulnerable songs are going to have head voice more than really strong, confident songs. So Bring Him Home from Les Mis, Beautiful City from Godspell. Young characters, like I said before, Not While I'm Around from Sweeney Todd or Corner of the Sky, they're going to have the true light flip because they're taking a risk. They're being vulnerable. Mixed voice for ladies is contemporary musical theater 1990s to now. It's one of the most important skills that we can teach our young ladies. So looking at pieces geared in that era, really important. Again, microphones. Microphones are driving a lot of these new vocal acrobatics. So again, musicals post 1970s going to be where you're going to probably find more mixed voice sounds. We consider the mixed a balanced navigation between the registers. So again, red voice, blue voice, what shade of purple are you looking at? There is no true head voice sound in this. So even when we hear like Sierra doing Part of Your World, it isn't, we don't, even when she flips out of into what would be her head voice sound at the very end, out of the sea, she's still mixing. There's still the support, the compression sound in that upper gear. So it's still mixing. If it starts to get light and breathy, we're not technically mixing anymore. So if it's, you know, post 1970 to now, we're not hearing the lighter, floatier head voice sound at all. Just assume everything's some form of a mix. Disney on Broadway loves this sound. They love giving their kind of female leads the like craziest ranges possible. And they use Belle as a really good example. She starts as an ingenue, so she has a much more soprano sound at the beginning of the show to becoming a strong, confident woman at the end of the show. So we see her mix shift from being a head voice dominant mix into the more chest voice dominant mix as the show goes on. We hear that a little bit with Ariel, but we don't hear Ariel talk in most of Act 2. So same kind of challenge, because the mix does happen that way. We do see her vocally mature as she goes through the show, but it becomes a little more jarring because we don't hear her talk as much. Ingenues, 1990s to present. So Once Upon a December from Anastasia and Live Out Loud from Little Princess. Again, working the mix. So if it's an ingenue character and it's a more contemporary show, that's working the mix. There's no head voice in that sound at all. Ballads and vulnerable songs are a great place to work this. Again, it's the same kind of risk of cracking that we hear in The Guys. So I'm Not That Girl from Wicked, Glinda's version. Glinda mixes it, alphabet chest voice it, which is a very deliberate choice in how it's written. So if you're wanting to work that, work Glinda's style of singing. Great example of a mix. Chenoweth does that beautifully. Everlasting from Tuck Everlasting and Who I Was from Bandstand, all emotional pieces that live in a more head voice dominant mix. Leading ladies, sopranos from the pop rock operas, all mix. So Once Upon a Dream, How Could I Ever Know? Sierra's version, Rebecca Luker does flip into her head voice. Sierra mixes it. So if you're wanting to work that idea, look at Sierra's version, but much more supported, more connected. Like I said earlier with the head voice, it really is more technically a mix. So if you're really wanting to work this connected, supported mix, look at the pop rock operas. If you're wanting to look at just the concepts of mixing, looking at keeping it lighter, keeping it floatier, but not fully flipping into your head voice, looking at the younger ingenue roles in the more contemporary musicals will probably be more successful than the pop rock operas where we're still almost belting in that sound. Mix for guys goes all the way back to the golden age and the tenors. This is the Maria sound. So we hear mixing with guys very, very early on in musical theater. So if you're really wanting to mix with a guy, go to the Love Struck tenor songs from the jazz age, like Easy to Love, or even into the golden age with like On the Street Where You Live. It's a much more classical technique sound because we don't typically in classical training want guys to flip into their falsetto. So we like them to mix all the way up to a C. So if the song has that more classical sound, assume it's more a mix than a belt. The lighter mix, the floatier mix of the folk sound appears, again, post-microphones. A great example of this is Pippin. Does this in Love Song. Great example there. It's a very Disney sound, too. When we strip away the classical vowels and strip away vibrato, we get into like Aladdin and Hercules, and Prince Eric also has this. It's not belted at all. And we do hear it in contemporary musical theater as well. Jazz Age pieces are a great place to look for these. Again, the Golden Age pieces, Maria from West Side Story, On the Street Where You Live, Younger Than Springtime from South Pacific. We do hear this mix from pop rock opera tenors, especially when they're being super vulnerable, usually on a love song. So Little Fall of Rain from Les Mis, or Joanna from Sweeney Todd. Folk music, again, Corner of the Sky, Beautiful City, and Sala Salou from Seussical are great kind of folk mixy light sounds. The contemporary musical theater, I think I like her from Summer of 42 as one of my favorites to give to teen guys when we're trying to work this sound, because it goes up pretty high, but they're up there for just a short period of time. We don't actually want them belting, because if you belt, she could hear you. You just stepped outside of the diner. That's the whole premise of the song. So if you're belting too loud about how you feel about her, she's going to hear you. So it's a great way to kind of suppress that sound in a way that a lot of guys will understand. And then Being a Geek from 13. Vowel shift in musical theater, more legit classical training is going to appear in Golden Age pop rock operas, especially the British pop rock operas, Les Mis, Phantom, etc. Disney musicals are going to have more legit sounding vowels. So if you're really wanting to work vowel shapes, these are ones, these three are great areas to look. Shows with British accents work really well for working vowels, because you're going to help them create that shape, and they're not thinking of how do I make the shape, they're just creating a sound, and kids like making voices. Stephen Sondheim is also going to always be legit vowels. Even in the belt, it's going to be much more vertical than it is going to be lateral. The more colloquial vowel shapes, just kind of normal speaking vowels, are going to be the Jazz Age. Again, they were kind of thumbing their nose at opera, so they weren't getting super into, does it sound like classical singing? They didn't want that. So the Jazz Age, the Classic Era, again, once we start getting microphones in, we don't care about the true pure vowels as much. The pop rock operas that are more rock driven, so Jesus Christ Superstar, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, those are going to have more belted, or what I refer to as colloquial vowels. Songs with Southern accents are really great for getting those belted vowels, like I said earlier, and so are Cockney accents. So for guys, I'm Getting Married in the Morning from My Fair Lady, great piece for that. Songs from Oliver, Consider Yourself, another one. Bert from Mary Poppins with Chim Chimmery, another great example of a song that works really well for helping students figure out those vowels. Because again, they're playing with the accent. They're not trying to figure out what shapes do I need to make. They're just creating a sound. And then by helping them explore that sound and then backing away from the accent but keeping the shape, then you can usually get the placement and all that you're looking for. All right, special techniques in musical theater. If you want to strengthen songs, strengthen sounds, patter songs, goofy characters, very confident characters, songs with character voices, all are great for helping people just strengthen the sounds. If you're trying to get a singer who's been like power singing through everything, they're over singing things, you want to work decompression. Again, the lighter songs, the folk songs, songs that were written post microphones, really going to be important for that. Sad and lonely songs like Sala Salou from Seussical, great way to get them to relax. Songs where they have to be vulnerable. So for guys, Not While I'm Around is a great one. Empty Chairs can, in the beginning, be a great way to explore decompression, and then just having them whisper a character song. If you're trying to get them to send their sound to the back of the space, putting the sound out there and project, the character pieces, characters that are kind of trying to, pump themselves up, faking it till they make it. Characters that are cocky and smug work really well because then they're just acting. They'll just be like, you know, how would they stand? Kind of the Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, kind of faking that presence works really well. But also all of the, you know, songs from the early pre-microphone days are written to send their sounds to the back of the theater. So that projection style works really well. If you're trying to work resonance, nerd voices, character voices, and Southern accents, any song can be sung in a nerdy voice. Fun fact. I love playing that game. I love playing the game of what would Urkel sound like singing Music of the Night from Phantom of the Opera. Again, getting them, put it out there, and then back away. If you're trying to work articulation and getting that compression, the chord closure, patter songs, character roles, because a lot of times the characters will have really strong Cockney accents, or the Southern accents will have really strong consonants, so that's going to really help get the articulation going and the compression. So character roles, we're going to want to look for that because they're not focused on beautiful singing. They're being funny. They're being goofy. So that's a great way to use those characters when you're trying to teach that concept. Up-tempo classic era songs, it's not where you start, or even Easy Street from Annie is another great example of songs that use tons of consonants and articulation. Breath, if you're trying to work breath, and we're running over, I'm sorry. There was a lot to cram into this PowerPoint. If you're working breath line with someone, you want to work golden age pieces because they're going to have lots of legato singing. Ingenue roles are going to have much more connected breath lines than the mezzo roles. Young heroes, like Corner of the Sky, Pippin is a great example of that. Aladdin, Proud of Your Boy, same thing. Head voice songs, again, are going to work breath a lot more than, say, the more belted songs, because belting is about minimizing breath and using as little air as possible. If you're trying to make someone be aware of their breath, how they're breathing, when they're breathing, how much they're breathing, patter songs are great because singers usually overbreathe when they have a patter song. They see lots of words and then they go, oh, I need tons of air. And most of the time, they don't need to take nearly as many breaths as they think they do. Alan Menken's songs are great for teaching breath awareness because he writes in 2-bar phrases and gives you rest to take breaths, but he expects you to breathe in 4-bar phrases. So if you're noticing that you're doing an Alan Menken song and a singer just feels like, you know, they've got a lot of vocal tension or whatever, check their breath. He wants you to breathe on punctuation that ends a sentence, not on commas, but he gives you rests all over the place. So if you're trying to work on helping a singer explore how do you phrase something, how do you not take in too much air that you end up with the idea of stale air where you have too much air in your lungs and you just keep topping off. How do you do that? Look at Alan Menken. Songs that are emotionally high stakes, Les Mis, Phantom, Jekyll and Hyde, tons of great awareness for breath. If you're working acting and you want them to commit to something, give them songs with high emotional stakes. So pop rock operas and Disney, that's where you want to go. The Golden Age pieces, their stakes are all about love. And a lot of young singers struggle with that. So if you give them a song that's just big, they're going to commit. Otherwise, it's going to feel weird. If you're wanting them to play honesty, nuance, and subtlety, go to vulnerability. Those would be the more contemporary shows. Things post 1990s. Jukebox musicals are also great because they have to just stand there and sing. If you're wanting to work physicality with someone, making them aware of how they move, Golden Age songs are great because they're extremes. Disney and character roles, again, extremes physically. As we start inching more into the contemporary shows, we're looking for normalcy. We're looking for nuance. So if you're trying to get someone to be a character and be big, looking at shows where there's tons of crazy characters. And that tends to be the Golden Age Disney kind of stuff. Looking at someone who's being still, find a character that's the closest to them. So in their age group. All right, just the last couple notes on appropriate repertoire. Age and gender is really important when we're trying to figure out what rep is going to work for someone or not. A lot of times people like to flop these around and the songs aren't written for them. So it doesn't work. And then we end up struggling with other things that we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole just to try to do a song that we think might be cool for a student. So if you are working on a song with a teen, just remember the rule that just because a role is supposed to be a teen doesn't mean they're written to be performed by a teen. So a great example of this is Evan from Dear Evan Hansen. Having teens sing this is really hard because they don't always have the musculature in their larynx to navigate this role. Just because they can sing it doesn't mean they should. So if you're really trying to pick rep that's going to teach them things, give them technique or give them songs that are going to help them train those techniques in those areas. So working the other contemporary shows, things like 13, the musical 13 songs from there are great, as well as, like I said, Summer of 42. Going to have lots of that upper end stuff so they can train those muscles to get to Dear Evan Hansen. Just giving them Dear Evan Hansen to try to teach them those techniques is too much. The same thing goes with Wednesday in Addams Family. Making sure that they have a connection to the character is really important. If you're trying to give them a song just because they like the song, they might not actually commit to it. They might not understand it, and they'll have so many roadblocks that your technique work is just going to be limited. So you may need to fabricate a story. If you think a technique is really important on a particular song, give them a story, help them create a story that they can relate to or that they can at least understand. A lot of the pieces that we try to give our singers aren't things that we can actually help them understand. And just because it sounds good doesn't mean they're actually going to be able to commit to it in a way that's going to help them explore the song. Also, we want to be ethnically appropriate with our pieces. Songs that are written for characters with specific accents or specific ethnicities can be really sticky. So if you ever have a question on a piece in terms of that, I just say then just avoid the piece. Just because a piece might be a great song for a singer, but if you're questioning, is this going to be an inappropriate song for this singer? I say just avoid it. Not all songs work for auditions. So just because a song sounds really good and they perform it well doesn't mean it's actually a great story to tell in the audition room. If you ever have a question about that, feel free to email me. Shameless promotion. Yay, we're here at the end. So the shameless promotion here for this webinar, all of the courses and stuff and all the resources available on my website, stagedoorunlocked.com. If you use this coupon code that's on the screen, you get 10% off of everything that's up there. So you can use that on top of the sale that's already running now. If you want to get the musical theater coaching course where I talk about all of these things, all this information about that is in the webinar handout guide that I sent. So I won't go through all of it. But if you are interested in the coaching course, this is the kind of stuff that I talk about in the course. A little less rushed, I will be honest and say. I think I tried to cram too much into this one, so I appreciate your patience. But if you are interested in the coaching course, it is on sale now. It's still on sale through the end of the month. So the course is normally $400, but right now you can get it for around $200. Plus, if you use the discount, you're in really good shape. So check that out if you're interested. Obviously, if you follow me on Voice Teachers for Young Singers or on the different social media stuff, you know about the rep guides that we have. Over 400 copies of that have been sold, which make me really happy. So thank you to all of you that have purchased the rep guides and stuff. But we have lists of songs. So if you're trying to figure out what songs fit into these categories, it's all divided out into these different categories, like what I talked about today. So you can go through by age and by gender and by vocal technique and there's a song genre, and you can find them all in there. Great resource for kind of doing some of this work. Not to shameless plug that, but if you are sitting here going, okay, Nate, this is all great info, but how do I find this information? Which song should I use? That would be a great place to look. Voice Teacher's Guide to Auditioning is also one, has song suggestions for all the popular shows that you might encounter in your studios, and they're all digital downloads. So you can buy them and then have them on your computer, get them printed and bound, however you want to do it. You don't have to pay for shipping, so that's awesome. You can also book consult sessions with me, like I've been saying through this whole thing. We can chat about musical theater, any questions you might have, rep questions, if you're looking for something for a particular student, feel free to just email me. If you have any challenges in your studio, feel free to message me on Facebook or put it in Voice Features for Young Singers and tag me in it. I always love hanging out in there answering musical theater questions. Also do workshops and master classes in different studios. So if you'd like to bring me into your studio, you can do that either online or in person. We can do audition prep or solo ensemble contest prep, and we'll make it be whatever you want. So there. Shameless plugs, all done. That was super fast. Thank you guys for hanging around. So if you have other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A that's going right now. Patty had asked a question earlier. What is the age limit on the song Consider Yourself? And can we change the key to accommodate? Consider Yourself is an interesting song because that role can be played all the way up into an adult. I personally have played Dodger as an adult. So I think as long as you can have someone who can sing it, go for it. It's a good song. There's not really anything to Dodger that limits him age-wise. He just needs to seem young and naive. It's a great technique piece. It isn't always a great audition piece because it's very overdone, but you can even do Consider Yourself with ladies because it's an ensemble number. So a lot of ladies can participate in that song as well. Can you change the key to accommodate? Yes. If you're doing a song in your studio that is really just geared at technique work, change keys to your heart's content. You do run the risk if you're having them listen to a song as kind of a reference recording. If you change the key, that can get a little confusing for singers. I try to be very strategic in how I choose rep for my singers that I don't have to change the keys, mostly because in auditions, we don't change the keys. My question is always, why'd you choose the song if you couldn't sing it in that key in the audition room? But if you're working on it for a technique piece in your studio, by all means, change the key. If you are someone that has those skills and those abilities, by all means, change the keys. Another question that was asked, what genre are we in right now? We are in the contemporary genre of musical theater. So really anything 1990s to now is contemporary. So if you have any questions, or any pieces that are 1990s to the present, is totally contemporary musicals. That I think is going to divide out here very, very shortly because typically our genres are only 20 years. So we're going to start, I think, needing a new category. I think we're going to have something that's going to divide out the 1990s to the early 2000s as a separate category because we've seen musicals totally shift with all the new movie adaptions and all of that. So I think we're going to see musical theater shifting into a new category soon, but I have no idea what that will be, and I'm really intrigued to hear what we decide to label that. So I think that's all of the questions. I'll stick around here for just a couple seconds if somebody else wants to type in questions. If you'd like to get a hold of me at any point, if you have questions, you can email me at info@stagedoorunlocked.com. You can also find me on all the different social media sites. The ones that I'm on the most are Facebook and Instagram, and those are at Stage Door Unlocked. We also have the YouTube channel, which is the same name, and there's lots of videos on there. We are going to keep doing these webinars once a month. So if you found this one helpful, we will be doing another one coming up in March. I don't know exactly what the topic is yet, but they will be coming. I will always make sure that you guys know about them at least a week in advance. This video will be live, so you can go back and watch it again afterwards if you felt like you missed something. Norma just asked that I'm willing to send the slides. Will I send them to everyone, or do we need to request them separately? I'm going to do my best to send them to everybody. The software that I use to send out the webinars has a size limit on the file, and I was having a really hard time getting the slides to compress. I will say that the majority of the information is in the handout. that I taught that I sent out earlier, but I will do my best to try to send them to everyone when I send out the replay. If that doesn't work, I might just say in there, email me directly if you want them, and then I will get them to you. That's a great question. Thank you. Any other questions really quick? Cool. I will answer any questions that I see in the chat here for the next couple of minutes after we're done. Oh, got one more. Cool. Cool. If you joined today by watching or by going into Voice Teachers for Young Singers, from that link, I don't have your email address. So you would need to email me directly. If you were signed up for the webinar before yesterday at 9 a.m., if you were signed up before yesterday at 9 a.m., an email was sent, and the handout the link is in there for the handout. If it's after that, I don't know who got them or not. So if you didn't get them, please email me with your email address and I will attach them to the email. With that, I'm going to let everybody go. Thank you so much for participating in this webinar. It's always so nice to get to share this information with you. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Please check out our resources and stuff. They're all there, hopefully, to best serve you and your clients in your studios. Have a fantastic day. I hope everyone isn't too covered in snow. And I will see you all very, very soon in our different forums at our next webinar. Bye.